Well, good evening, everybody. Austin Eldridge back here with you as we get ready to preview Ole Miss and Georgia Tech over the weekend. And tonight, I am thrilled to be joined by, you know him, you love him, one of the other members of the Rebel Walk, among many other things, including working down in Biloxi with the Shuckers and Thomas Dillard, and an Ole Miss graduate, among many other things. Unfortunate Braves fan, but we won't go into that too much. But Nick Phillips joins me tonight. Nick, glad to have you aboard, man. It's going to be a fun show.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me. I'm excited for the preview show.
Yeah, and a real quick shout out to Bo Pentecost for making a fantastic overlay for us tonight. If you guys don't know who Bo is, he makes all these overlays, which is basically the backgrounds that you see on these videos. He's also responsible for the HYDR Twitter account that you guys probably all follow. So that's Bo. So man, it looks awesome. He went out above and beyond on this one. Outdid himself, but appreciate Bo for doing that. A lot going on this weekend. Obviously, Ole Miss will be in Atlanta taking on Georgia Tech. They're probably either already there or about to be on the way down there, getting their practices in prior to Saturday. Somewhat early game on Saturday with a 2:30 kickoff on ABC, so they'll probably be down there a little earlier than they would have been otherwise. But before we get into that too much, Nick, we're gonna discuss the game in detail. We'll talk a little bit about what happened last week as well, just because I kind of had the show to myself right after the game against UCA, and I'm sure everybody was like, "Boy, that sucked." So we'll go over that again, and we'll talk about that. But real quick, before we get into Ole Miss football, a lot of you probably remember the name Jeff Lebby. He, of course, was the offensive coordinator from last season. And I just wanted to touch on this because if you didn't hear what Jeff had to say this past week, he's really outdoing himself with going out of his way to be a jerk, essentially, and basically throw people under the bus. And his comment essentially was that he thinks things are going better at Oklahoma because of who he's got now at Oklahoma in terms of his quarterback and in terms of the other staff and things of that nature. He said he thinks it's better at OU than it was at Ole Miss and UCF. Now, ironically, the quarterback at Oklahoma happens to be one of Jeff Lebby's former quarterbacks at UCF and Dylan Gabriel.
Yep.
But nonetheless, Ole Miss and UCF put Jeff Lebby on the map. Nobody would know who Jeff Lebby was without Ole Miss. And Ole Miss knew who he was because of UCF and because of what he did at UCF. And really, Josh Heupel was mostly responsible for that at UCF. And then Jeff Lebby really rose to prominence at Ole Miss by really calling the offense. And then you have a quarterback like Matt Corral, who is a generational guy who played for him last year and just led Ole Miss by his sheer will to a 10-win season and a Sugar Bowl appearance. I don't understand what is going on in Jeff's mind. I really don't know why Jeff has decided to take it upon himself to just shoot at his former coaches and team. But for some reason, Jeff thinks that's a good idea, and he's burning those bridges in a hurry.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. You mentioned Dylan Gabriel, and he was there at UCF before he came to Ole Miss. But like you said, I was actually looking at the stats today just to kind of see what it was all about. The stats are similar, but whenever you take the American Conference and SEC and kind of say, okay, well, he's doing this in the SEC and he's doing this in the AAC, and then not to mention you have Matt Corral that led Ole Miss to the first 10-win season, a Sugar Bowl, which is, other than making it to a national championship and college football playoff, that's like almost as good as you can get as far as satisfying an Ole Miss fan base. And yeah, I thought it was very odd, and he kind of took a shot at himself too, while he was at UCF, said, oh, well, we're better now. And I think, they say, there's more than one way to skin a cat. I think it probably depends on who you're rooting for and who you think, but I don't think it sits very well with Ole Miss people, with how much Matt meant to Ole Miss last year and how much, you see it this year. And you mentioned the quarterback battle earlier, and, we're going to get into that. And Lane Kiffin said it last year, you need to appreciate what we have right now, because next year it's going to be a lot different. So, yeah, he is not doing himself many favors as far as making Ole Miss fans happy. So, yeah, I guess it is what it is, and it could be taken out of context to a certain extent, but it's just And like I said, it is what it is, you know. And is that making anyone in the building at the Manning Center upset? No, they don't care. He's gone.
Yeah.
We have our guy, and that's all that really matters. But like you said, it's definitely interesting to see, you know, he took it upon himself to make those comments, which you normally don't see. But like I said, it is what it is.
Yeah, and you know, to your point again, and I understand that his comments probably being blown out of proportion a little bit as well, similar to the ludicrous reporting that was done by the Carolina Panthers so-called beat writer when he just completely tried to obliterate Matt Corral for clicks, when everyone who actually knows Matt Corral knew what Matt meant by those comments. So
Right.
yeah, similar situation there where yeah, it was probably overblown a bit, but when you are a high profile name like Jeff Levy, you have to be so careful with how you say things. And
Right.
obviously, that's going to, you know, you look at what the ESPN networks did with the Alabama Texas game over the weekend when they did the, I guess, the profiles of 5 coaches who basically said if it wasn't for Nick Saban, XYZ, I wouldn't be here, whatever the case may be.
Right.
You know, that's how you should handle it, unless you left a horrible situation, you know, like where there was, you know, like a Penn State or something back in the day. Obviously, nobody's going to have much good to say about the end of the Joe Paterno and Jerry Sandusky area. That's, you know, but other than a you know, exigent circumstance like that, typically you need to have good things to say about your former head coach and teams, because you know you don't want to burn those bridges and you want to leave those doors open and you want to leave those relationships open because you never know when you might need those again. So
Right.
interesting to see what that Jeff said. That I don't know if he'll say anything further about it. It will be curious. I will be curious to see if Oklahoma loses a game in the near future. If it's brought up about, well, what do you think about these comments? Did that, you know, what did that? Did you have, you know, do you think that affected anything? Kind of, who knows? And also to your point about the American and the SEC, you're 100% right on that. Dylan Gabriel, great quarterback, not taking anything away from him.
Right.
But the American Conference is not the SEC conference.
Right.
You know, the commissioner of the AAC loves to talk about how Power 6, Power 6, Power 6. Dude, you've got like one good team, maybe 2 in your conference.
Right.
You have Cincinnati, and then you have Houston sometimes. And
Right.
that's it. Memphis has had a couple of good years in the Mike Norvell and early Josh Heupel days. That's
Right.
it.
That's it.
Not Josh Heupel. I'm sorry. I said Josh Heupel. I meant Justin Fuente. I apologize. You know, they've had a couple of good years. Yeah, they beat Ole Miss a couple of times too.
Right.
Ole Miss had one of the worst offensive coordinators in their history one of those years in Rich Rodriguez.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to put too much stock in that. The American is not a good conference. It just isn't. I'm not, and I'm not trying to rile American Conference people up. I'm not trying to say Cincinnati hasn't been a good team and they haven't played some good games. They haven't beaten some good programs. But as a whole,
right,
on a week-to-week basis, that conference is not a strong one when it comes to football.
Right.
So you can't really compare what Dylan Gabriel did there to what Matt Corral did in the SEC, particularly when Matt Corral did without his receivers and one of his running backs and with that bum ankle half the season.
Right.
So yeah, very, very interesting comments from Jeff, and I will be curious. I doubt he'll say anything further about it.
Yeah, I doubt it either.
He probably regrets it already because I guarantee you he knows how much it blew
He's hearing
up.
about it.
He's on
sure.
Twitter.
Yeah,
So-
he's hearing about it.
Yeah, he's hearing about it, and Venables may have even said something like, "Dude, you know, don't stir
Yeah.
the pot like that. We're here to win football games over here now, and we're
Right.
about to be in the SEC. So,
Right.
welcome back, Jeff Levy, here before too long.
Right.
Now, on a separate note, before we get into the Georgia Tech game, obviously Ole Miss put a beat down on Central Arkansas last weekend in Oxford. You're supposed to 59-3. Honestly, I think Lane Kiffin thought that score was too close. I think he thought it should have been more like 75-3. He was definitely clearly frustrated with a couple of those drives. Here's what I said, Nick, and I think you would agree with this. I appreciate that Ole Miss won the game 59-3.
Absolutely.
I would have preferred it would have been a shutout, but 59-3 is a good win. However, it is Central Arkansas.
Right.
And you've got to be real careful what you do after a game like that, because the hype train, oh, look at that. All right, our offense is clicking, 59 points, boom, boom, boom. Defense looked great. It's an FCS school.
Right.
You know, and Ole Miss really hasn't been tested yet to this point, and the better team that they played kind of made them look bad in that second half in Troy.
Yeah.
And Troy is a mid-level FBS school. Now, they've pulled upsets in their history, but it's not like they're a top-tier program.
Right.
So I don't know what were your thoughts on the game? I enjoyed watching them play well. I love what I'm seeing from Quinshon Judkins, in particular, but it's Central Arkansas, so we got to be real careful.
Yeah, you got to be careful with those type of games, like you said. You can't get too high on that. Like you said, it's FCS school. Yeah, 59 points, that's cool. And I think that's another thing about winning those type of games and still being able you can learn something from a game like that. That's the second game of the season, got a lot of new faces. And like you said, I think it's good to have those type of games in the early of the season. You get a lot of guys that can play due to, the score. And also, you saw them, typically in big games like that, or at least the big margin score games, you don't see teams throw the ball as much. You see them run it, kind of run the clock out. And you saw Lane Kiffin kind of like the Troy game, said, we're up, but, we still have a quarterback battle to figure out. And they needed to throw the ball just for almost like a scrimmage, say, hey, this is what we need to look at. So like you said, it's not troublesome. You beat up a team like that. Okay, you watch the film, learn what you need to learn, and you throw it out. Because there's not much that you can really take and say, oh, because is it 2 weeks against Kentucky? You're going to be facing double the talent on the other side, and you're going to have quite frankly, you're going to have some fits at some positions. That's just the SEC. You're going to have some fits. But like I said, and I think it's good, you face Troy, and then you come back, face UCA, and you can kind of work on some more things. And then I think this week, which we're about to get into, Georgia Tech, I think it's another step. It's that next step. They played, we'll get into it, but, they're Clemson. I think that's a good gauge of who they are, playing a team like Clemson. So, yeah, I think it's good. You really can't be too upset about being 2-0. So that's all I have on that.
Yeah, I mean, and what you said about the film, I would say the most important thing to take on film from that UCA game is negatives.
Right.
Because
exactly.
positives are going to be a lot against a team like that,
Right,
but you
exactly.
can't put too much stock in those positives because of
Right.
who you just played. And it is real easy to get too comfortable about to go down there. You just whooped up on a team you're supposed to whoop up on, and now you're going on the road to face Georgia Tech, and you might be looking ahead a little bit because then you got Tulsa and then you got Kentucky, who just beat Florida and who is 2-0 and who looks really good.
Really
Kentucky
good.
football all of a sudden coming on strong
right.
these last couple of years. And that is certainly not a game you want to look ahead to right now because
Right.
it's going to be real easy to do that. You got to be real careful how far ahead you get. And Georgia Tech is a team. Now, to be frank, you're supposed to beat Georgia Tech, and we'll get into that a little later as well. But the negatives are what you have to look at. There were some problems even in the game against UCA. You need to take that into consideration. The offensive line has not been as good as I would have liked it to be, and how good they were kind of touted to be so far, even against Troy and UCA. They haven't been superb. So definitely some messes to clean up there. Georgia Tech's going to provide another opportunity to do that. The defense has looked strong, but again, you've played two opponents who you're supposed to look strong against.
Right.
Georgia Tech is really a team you need to look strong against. However, they may be a little bit of an interesting one on defense, and we'll get into that when we start talking about that game. Before we get into the game itself, we do need to obviously update you all on the quarterback battle, and that is exactly that. It's still apparently a battle, at least according to Lane Kiffin. After the game against UCA, and again, I know it was UCA, but I thought Lane would have already named the starter, and I thought it was going to be Jackson Dart. I feel like Dart at this, and I love Luke Altmaier. This is it. Do not hear anything I say about Dart as a shot at Luke Altmaier. I can stand some of the comments I've seen on social media basically crucifying Luke Altmaier and saying it's ridiculous that he's even in consideration, and Jackson Dart was going to be the starter all along, and NIL, and we can't hate on. Nobody's hating on Jackson Dart if they suggest Luke Altmaier should have gotten a start or two. Not at all. He should have. He absolutely should have. Based on what he did in the Sugar Bowl last year, he should have.
Right.
And that 100% agreed with Luke getting the start this past week. And had he not have gotten hurt early on in the UCA game, I felt like I would have liked to see him start the Georgia Tech game for sure, just to see more of him.
Right.
particularly if he would have kept up the way he had played early in that first quarter, leading Ole
Right.
Miss down the field 2 or 3 times. But Lane Kiffin, he says he thinks Luke is fine, but he understands it's still a battle. He also said they haven't made a decision. Both guys are still battling. They're doing good things and bad things. They're still young. And he just basically said, we hope they improve this week. And that's all Lane would really say about it. So he has not made a decision. I don't think he's officially announced the starter for this weekend yet either, as far as who's going to start against Georgia Tech. I do think that it will probably, and this is pure speculation on my part, because ordinarily I would have said I think it would be Jackson. I don't know now because Luke didn't play as much as Lane anticipated him to play against UCA. So I am curious if he's going to put Luke back out there again. I'm curious your thoughts on this, Nick. I feel that Jackson gives Ole Miss the best chance to win long term out of the 2 quarterbacks, simply because I think he is a little bit more mobile. And I think that his deep ball, although it's a little inconsistent, has a little bit more promise to it. And once he finds it, he will be a little bit better overall. And he would win Ole Miss a couple of more games than Luke would, just because Luke doesn't really have the mobility to scramble nearly as much as Jackson does. Curious what you think. If you had any, real thoughts on the quarterback battle, you don't have to pick a favorite necessarily, obviously. But, I feel like Jackson's the guy based on what I've seen.
Right.
That could change. Obviously, we'll see what happens on Saturday.
Yeah, I agree with you a lot. I think Dart gives the team, based on what you say, the mobility, the deep ball, gives them a chance to win a few more games. But on the other hand, you have Luke Altmaier, who's been under Lane Kiffin for a year, learned from Matt Corral, and maybe, like you said, he's not as mobile. The deep ball might not be as prominent, but he's going to make the reads. He's going to take the check down when it's there, and maybe the decision making might be a little bit more better. But it's kind of at the point where you kind of take one or the other. You take the deep ball, or you take less interceptions. But you have, with the deep ball, you have more. As they say, score from far. That's going to be a little bit easier to achieve with Dart. But I think, and like you said, I thought after that UCA game, not knowing the extent of Luke's injury, I thought it was almost certain that either after the game or come Monday, Kiffin was going to name Dart the starter. But with the injury obviously not being as serious as we thought, and like you said, Altmaier didn't play as much as Lane probably would have liked him to. So, I see him probably, like you said, getting the start against Georgia Tech, just because based off what he said, they need more information. They have information off the scrimmages, but, it's kind of hard when you're facing a team that you face every day in practice, and they know what you're doing. They know what you like to do. So I think that is going to benefit Luke another start. But I think come Tulsa, and this is my opinion, as a player, I would have liked a starter to have been named week 1.
Right.
Because you have your guy and say, hey, he's our guy. And as Russell Wilson said, let's ride.
Yeah.
And
and the chemistry that Dart has with Trigg, I feel like, is a big thing, because Luke doesn't have that. And Trigg is certainly going to be one of your most offensive weapons this year.
Right.
Not to say that Luke couldn't develop the chemistry with Trigg. He threw a couple of touchdown passes to him against UCA. Granted, they were short touchdown passes, but he can find him. But Dart and Trigg came together. They have that chemistry together. They have that bond already.
Right.
And that is somebody who right there, that's a couple of weapons that are familiar with each other. Then you throw Mingo in the mix, who Dart clearly found, knows how to find him. You got Malik Heath, who is slowly working his way. He had a couple of hiccups in the UCA game. He dropped a wide open ball, but nobody's perfect. You're not going to have, nobody's going to have a perfect game. But the chemistry, with Dart and Trigg, I feel like is a big point. But, Lane Kiffin probably don't care about that. He just cares about who's going to win me football games.
Right. Absolutely. And that's what he's here to do. Here at Ole Miss to do, win football games. They say, a lot of coaches, it's hard not to. We're all human, and you can have a favorite. And I think it's probably y'all think it's hard on the fans. We don't have a starting quarterback. But hard on the quarterbacks. They don't know, but this is harder than nobody more than Lane Kiffin, because he's got to make a decision, and time's ticking. He knows it. He needs to name a starter as soon as he can, but he doesn't want to make that. And that's another thing I was thinking today. I think with both quarterbacks, you're not going to make the wrong decision, but one's going to end up being the better decision.
Yeah.
Because
the biggest thing in my mind at this point is, and Luke's injury threw a kink at all this, and that's not Luke's fault. Obviously, you don't ever want to see anybody get hurt, no matter how minor the injury is. I think Lane's original plan was, I'm going to start Jackson week 1. I'm going to start Luke week 2. I'm going to know who I'm going to start.
Right.
I think that was his original intention. And the reason now that it's a little bit trickier and you've got to figure something out quickly, you don't want to not know who your guy is going to be going into Tulsa. And the reason for that is Kentucky's right after Tulsa.
Right.
And you need to know who your guy is prior to Kentucky, because you need that guy getting all the reps. You need him getting all the practice with the first team dudes. You need that guy, the sole focus for the offense, because Kentucky, we're okay. So we're on this. We've got Troy, then we've got UCA. They dropped down a level. Then we come back up a little bit to Georgia Tech, and then Tulsa's even. Then, but Kentucky is just talent level just jumped immensely. The level of difficulty for opponent just jumped immensely. Yep. It is a whole different animal when Kentucky comes to town in 3 weeks. You cannot afford to not know who's going to be getting the most of your reps at that point. So I know that Lane's probably initial plan was, I would know by Georgia Tech who I'm going to have starting, and Georgia Tech would be from Georgia Tech onward. They're my guy. Now the kink was Luke only played about a quarter and a half, and now he obviously wasn't himself after that injury. The interception he threw was certainly related to that injury. By the way, that story that was circulating Twitter about, that some Ole Miss media relations person that came out and was like, and basically said Luke got substituted because of the interception, not because of the injury. Hogwash. Lane Kiffin himself said that he does not like to substitute quarterbacks directly after an interception. It teaches them nothing. That's a bunch of baloney. That was some damage control talking, whatever the case may be. I guarantee you they did not get that from Lane, because that's not Lane. Lane would not pull a quarterback just because he threw an interception. So that was a bunch of nonsense. I couldn't believe that when I saw that getting tweeted out.
Yeah, I didn't believe it either.
And it wasn't that people tweeting it out were making something up. It was that the media relations people didn't know what they were talking about. Whoever that spokesperson was, because I wasn't at the game in person. Obviously, I'm still recovering, so I don't know who it was. But they don't need, don't say things like that when it directly contradicts what the coach said already. Especially considering Lane said at halftime, "Yeah, Luke's hurt. I'm waiting on a medical update." So it was all about the injury. That aside, I think I would not be shocked now if we see Luke start Saturday, to see what he can do, to see what he can bring, to see how healthy he really is, and if he has the health to play a full half, even to really get a feel for what Luke brings compared to what Jackson brings. If possible, I'd like to see the game split up between the two of them. Just so we know this is what Luke's got, this is what Jackson's got, and now we know for sure what we're looking at, because before that Tulsa game, we need to know who's going to be starting that Tulsa game, and from then on. Speaking of Lane Kiffin, obviously, before we're gonna jump into Georgia Tech here in just a minute. It took less than 3 weeks into the football season for, well, what about Lane Kiffin to Nebraska to happen? Just to stop it. Stop it with these idiotic, dumb takes on Lane Kiffin. He is not leaving Ole Miss to go to Nebraska. It's not going to happen
at all.
It just completely ludicrous. It didn't surprise me at all. Andy Staples, you and whoever your co-host is of your show that you did, calm down, okay? Just because y'all want Lane Kiffin out of Ole Miss doesn't mean he's going out of Ole Miss. Now, the Mark Stoops to Nebraska talk that I've heard a little bit of this past week, that's more realistic. I'm not saying Mark's going to leave. Mark has had job offers before to leave Kentucky, and he's not left Kentucky, and he's built Kentucky up. So I wouldn't blame him for staying in the SEC at Kentucky, particularly in the SEC East. the SEC easier. But can Mark Stoops to Nebraska makes more sense than Lane Kiffin in Nebraska.
Right.
I don't think either one of them are going to Nebraska, but it certainly makes more sense than Lane Kiffin. That aside, real quick, before we jump into Georgia Tech, if you're heading down to Atlanta, I don't know if you are, Nick. I know I'm not. I can't make it down there. No. But whoever's heading down there, if you want to go to Atlanta, you might as well go in style and in comfort. And that means Dead Soxy. You need to get your Dead Soxy socks. You need to represent while you're down there in Atlanta at Georgia Tech. You need to make sure that those Yellow Jacket fans know who's in town. And the best way to do that is to go to deadsoxy.com. Use the code RebelWalk for 25% off site-wide. They've got some amazing socks. Of course, we know they have the Matt Corral socks. We know they've got the beer shower socks. They got a lot of baseball socks. They got a lot of football socks. You guys all know them. I didn't have time to get a picture up just now, or I would have done that. But I've showed you those pictures before, guys. Go to deadsoxy.com. Check them out. Again, use the code RebelWalk for 25% off site-wide. You can see it at the bottom of your screen there. Deadsoxy.com. Travel in style and in comfort down to Atlanta. And then when Ole Miss comes back home for their game against Tulsa, you need to tailgate in style. And that means you need to go to hottytoddytents.com for your tailgating services. Ole Miss approved, and they will set up your tent. They'll set up your area. They will take care of you for all of your tailgating needs in the Grove. And you need to go check them out, hottytoddytents.com. We are proud to have them on board for this football season as a sponsor for these videos. Thank you to hottytoddytents.com, and you guys need to check them out. I promise you won't regret it. They are a great service, and they are very helpful to you. Makes your life a lot easier on game day. Just going to tell you that right now. The whole game weekend, hottytoddytents.com will help you out. So check them out. And again, deadsoxy.com. Use the code RebelWalk for 25% off site-wide. All right, Nick, Georgia Tech. That's the main topic of conversation this evening. This is a run-first team. They've been that way for years. We all know what Georgia Tech is going to bring. They're going to run first. They're going to run somewhat of an option offense. It's not quite as crazy as it was, like to the Navy and Army levels that it used to be. They do have more passing in their offense now. Coaching changes and offensive changes. They've tried to evolve a little bit with the game of college football to an extent, but still, they are still a run-first offense. That is what Georgia Tech does. That's what their quarterbacks do. Their quarterback, Jeff Sims, has rushed for the second most yards on that team. I mean, if that tells you anything, he's got 111 yards compared. Dante Smith has 137. That's the lead. Sims, as far as passing, he's 31 of 53 for 264 yards in 2 games with one touchdown and 2 interceptions. So they're going to run at you more so than they're going to pass. Shockingly enough, they passed better against Clemson than they did against Western Carolina, but that's probably because they realized they could run against Western Carolina a lot better than they could run against Clemson. Obviously, they kept it close with Clemson for a little while, but they ended up getting drum rolled out of that stadium by the time it was all said and done. 41-10 was the final. Western Carolina, they actually did not win by quite as large of a margin as I would have expected. 35-17 was the final in that one. Let's be real, Nick. This is a game that Ole Miss is supposed to win. They're a 16.5-point favorite. If you lose to Georgia Tech, regardless of it being a road game in the ACC, it's a bad loss.
Yeah, it's a bad loss for sure. And like you said, this is a team you're supposed to beat. I think last time I looked, it was like a 16.5-point favorite favoring Ole Miss. And like you said, going on the road, I mean, it's not going to be easy, but it's still a game that we're supposed to win. You know, SEC against ACC, the talent that we have versus the talent that they have. And, it's just one that you have to win. And then you lose against Georgia Tech, then you're kind of hitting a tailspin coming home against Tulsa. And you're kind of, everyone has their antennas up and kind of a mild panic. And you don't want that, going in the game before Kentucky. So you got to go there on the road, take care of business, and come back to Oxford 3-0.
Yeah, and obviously, I don't think anybody, even us, has aspirations necessarily of Ole Miss being a college football playoff team this year.
Right.
It just wasn't the expectation coming in. They lost too much talent in the unknowns of the quarterback situation and some of the offense. certainly take away from that. Now, the running back room has been phenomenal, but the quarterback situation, obviously, you lose the amount of talent in a generational quarterback like Matt Corral. You're obviously going to take somewhat of a hit. However, I think Ole Miss is certainly thought they certainly have the talent to be a top 10 team again, and in consideration for a New Year's Six Bowl when it's all said and done. That said, you can afford one loss, if it's to Alabama or Arkansas or somebody like that. You can't afford the one loss to be Georgia Tech early in the season and then have to still wait for your SEC slate, which is brutal this year for Ole Miss. Absolutely brutal. So the one loss against Georgia Tech, you're done. You're toast. I mean, unless you run the table from there and you have wins over the entire SEC West plus Kentucky and Vanderbilt, then you might be okay. People might forget about week 3 against Georgia Tech. But you don't want to lose a game that you're a 16.5-point favorite in on the road against a Georgia Tech team that is not going to be very good. Let's just be real. They're not going to be a factor in the ACC. They're not going to win a lot of football games. They are outclassed on both sides of the ball on paper. The talent Ole Miss has, even with the quarterback situation, is still better than what Georgia Tech has. This is a game that it should not be close. This should be a 21-point victory at least if you're Ole Miss. They should not be within 2 touchdowns of you. And I'm not trying to overhype the game. I'm not trying to overhype Ole Miss here, but that's just the facts. Georgia Tech does not stack up with what Ole Miss has, and it needs to show. You can't go down there and afford to be sloppy. You can't go down there and have a game. You can't let them stick around like you let Troy stick around a little bit and kind of make that second half uglier than it should have been. That 28-10 score was closer than it appeared. So, you don't want one of those games down here. I mean, on paper, Ole Miss has rushed for 499 yards compared to Georgia Tech's 316. They've passed for 444 compared to Georgia Tech's 264. Even with the quarterbacks splitting reps, I mean, if you look at what Jackson Dart has done, he's thrown for 336 yards, and he's basically played a game and a half. Georgia Tech starting quarterback has started both of those games, and he's thrown for 264. Luke Altmaier threw for 103 yards, almost half of what Sims threw in half of a game, less than half of a game.
Less than half, yeah.
And now granted, the competition wasn't great, but that, again, the talent that Ole Miss has is so much better than what Georgia Tech has. This should be a blowout. I mean, I'm just being realistic here. If it's not a blowout, I'm going to be very concerned. Yeah,
and kind of like you said, we kind of let Troy hang around, but even in the game like against Troy and UCA, you let them hang around, you're still going to beat them. And this is a game, like you said, that they're top to bottom, we're better than them, hands down, fact. But if we let them hang around, they will give us a push, and if we play bad enough, that they could beat us. So, I think it's good to play an opponent like this, kind of, a game you're supposed to win, but it's going to give you some better competition. And I'm interested to see how we face up against their quarterback, who's a mobile quarterback. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, I think he leads the team in carries. So, they kind of run that option offense. Not like you mentioned they used to, the Navy, Army triple option. It's not like that anymore. They got a little bit of a more spread kind of pass scheme to it. But you're right. They're a run first team. They're going to try and I'm sure, especially with us running a 3-man front, that's going to be their first thing. They're going to try and pound the rock and see what they can't do, in those gaps on our defensive line. And then that brings in, our linebackers who come into the season. I think a lot of people were concerned. And then I've just been amazed by our linebackers so far this season. You have Troy Brown transfer, Kari Coleman transfer, and then you have 2 returners in Austin Keys and Alshani Sinstrunk, they're playing lights out, and that's very important, that position for our defense. Because they don't make the plays they're supposed to make, fill their gaps, make tackles in space. You could have dudes busting 30, 40 yards, rushes left and right.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned Troy Brown and Kari, and then you got to throw Isheem Young in there as well, another transfer. Just
Yeah.
those, I have been so impressed with those
Right.
three in particular. Those transfers are making a huge impact already. They're all over the place.
Right.
And then I loved, Davison Igbunason. I always am afraid.
Yeah.
I always screw up his last name. He'll forgive me eventually. You know what I mean? Everybody knows what I'm talking about, okay? When I say
they know. They know.
He thought he had an interception. It was very close. In the last game. He's flying all over the place. And that's a true freshman. So you've got guys that are really making an impact early in their Ole Miss careers, the transfers, and then obviously you mentioned the returners. The defense has looked solid. And this game, they're going to be tested. Now, and when I say tested, it's Georgia Tech. What you have to be careful with Georgia Tech, because they have that more passing scheme implemented with the run first offense now, is what they will do is they will try to lure you in to this. They're going to run, they're going to run, they're going to run, they're going to run. And you're expecting the run, you're expecting the run, you're expecting the run. And then boom, they pull the one good play Navy had against Memphis this past weekend was a 67-yard touchdown pass, because Memphis was expecting to run. Now, they're not going to be able to do that to you the whole game, because eventually, eventually you're going to realize what's going on. But you got to always be ready. You can't get lured to sleep and then let them get behind you and bust you for a long play, particularly early when the game is close. You don't want them to get any kind of momentum. So that'd be the one. That's the one area where Ole Miss defense needs to be ready, is don't get lured to sleep by the run first offense that Georgia Tech has, and let them gas you for some big pass plays. You are right. Jeff Sims, the quarterback, he is the leading rusher by one over Dante Smith.
I knew it was a lead, but I wasn't sure about
Dante
how much.
has 20, and then Dylan McDuffie has 11. He's the next closest. Smith obviously has 132 rushing yards. Sims with 89 net yards. So, they are decent. The quarterback's running pretty frequently for Georgia Tech. I mean, he's run the ball 21 times. He's passed the ball 31 times. So, I mean, he's running almost as much as he is passing. And then the running back's doing the rest of the work there. So, all in all, you got to pay attention to that. But, again, Georgia Tech, their number one statistical category in yards is kickoffs. But after that, it's punts. So, they have 499 yards in punts on third. They punt a lot. They are forced to punt a lot. Ole Miss should make them have to do the same. The defenses look better. The run defense looks better this year. They've got better pieces with these transfers to fit into the scheme that they like to run that Partridge is running. So I feel pretty confident. I think that 16.5-point spread is good. I don't think that's too much. I think Ole Miss should easily win by that margin. But again, don't look over Georgia Tech.
Yeah, you can't take playing them for granted for sure. That's a game you got to go in there, take care of your business for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think they will. But you just have to be really careful, and you have to protect your quarterback. That is one of the number one things that obviously we saw it in the Sugar Bowl. Just an unfortunate injury to Matt Corral, partially due to the fact that our offensive line couldn't stop anybody from getting through. Baylor was all over Matt Corral from the time that the first kickoff of that game. They were destroying the offensive line. We saw Luke Altmaier get hurt because Casey Kelly missed an easy block, and Casey hasn't done much this year. I'm a little bit concerned about Casey. He has not put on much of a show so far in what action I've seen, and he let a guy just blow him up from Central Arkansas to get to Luke Altmaier, and then Luke's injured because of it. So hopefully Casey will get his head right and get back in the game a little bit. But overall, I've been very impressed with the defense. But again, I'm taking that with a grain of salt because of who Ole Miss has played so far. Ole Miss could easily be 6-0 this season. You can't overlook Kentucky, but the schedule allows for it if everybody plays to their potential. The biggest surprise, I guess, for me this year has been Quinshon Judkins. I was all about Zach Evans and Ulysses Bentley, and we all knew about them, all the hype coming in. We knew Judkins was going to be good, but he's a true freshman. He's coming in right out of high school. Nobody was really talking about him because it was all Zach Evans and Ulysses Bentley. Well, lo and behold, Quinshon Judkins is the leading rusher on this team with 191 yards on just 24 carries. The dude is
Right.
just bowling people over like a bowling ball. He has one touchdown. Zach Evans with 186 carries on or 130. Wow, I can't talk. 186 yards on 31 carries. So 7 more carries, 5 less yards. Now, granted, they're built different.
Right.
Ulysses Bentley actually has 2 touchdowns. He leads the running backs in that category. But man, Quinshon Judkins, what a story he has been, built like a tank and using it to his advantage.
Yep. I was kind of like you said, you look at him and he's going to be good, but you don't know when. Hey, he's a freshman playing in the SEC, and we've yet to see him play in the SEC, but he's shown us everything that he's going to be more than capable to do so. And, I love his running style. He kind of shows me shades of Snoop Connor, which I think a lot of Ole Miss fans love, And I was actually doing some homework today, and I was on, I'm sure you're familiar with PFF, Pro Football Focus, and he is the highest rated.
Corral haters of last year, old PFF.
Judkins is the highest rated running back among running backs in FBS with at least 20 carries. So he's getting the love, and
he's averaging 8 yards a carry. I mean, this is something. The stats, Ole Miss has outgained their 2 opponents on the ground by 267 yards.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the opposite for the last couple of years for Ole Miss. Now, granted, again, they haven't played anybody yet, but the fact that they are not only winning the ground game, but dominating it is just absolutely insane. I mean, they are blowing them up. Now, obviously, you hit SEC play, you hit some bigger boys on defense.
Right.
Then we'll really see what these guys are made of. But Quinshon ain't scared, man. He ain't scared of nobody, and he's going right at him.
The beast.
He's channeling his inner Leonard Fournette a little bit with just trying to run over people.
Yeah.
And it's working out well for him so far.
Yeah, it really is. And I'm just really excited to see this, not only the season he has this year, but the career he has in Oxford and at Ole Miss. He's really, he looks great. And like I said, I'm excited to see him. But, you can't go without mentioning, we haven't seen as much of him, but Ulysses Bentley, he's a talented back as well. And, in a room like they have, it's going to be tough for all those guys to get as many carries as they want and probably would get elsewhere, with the stacked room that they have. And, I think it was earlier this season, I think someone asked Zach Evans how many carries he would like to have a game, and he said 30. He's not going to sniff 30 carries, and if he does, someone's hurt. That's just how stacked that room is, and how Lane Kiffin runs that offense, keep them fresh, and, you have all of them playing, at their best ability throughout the whole game. So I'm excited to see that. And I think that's, we talked about the quarterbacks. I think that's kind of a silver lining in this quarterback battle. If you don't have those 3 running backs, I think you're in a little bit more of a panic. You're trying to figure something out sooner. You don't have that crutch to lean on with the running backs, say, hey, well, we've got something on with our offense. And otherwise, I think, like I said, you have a little panic, probably, Lane Kiffin rushes into a decision. When you rush a decision, you might not, like you said, they need more information. So you rush into that decision and you don't get all the information you need. So I think that's a big plus for that quarterback battle.
Yeah. You guys will have to forgive me, by the way. If you see me grimace in any form, it's not because I don't like Nick. It's because I'm still hurting a little bit from this recovery from the surgery. So I get random pains sometimes at the surgical spot. So just ignore that if you see it. I couldn't help it a minute ago. I couldn't hold that one in. I got a pretty stout one there. So still in the process of recovering from that, which is why I haven't been able to go to the games in person. And you probably won't see me at the games in person, if any, this year, just because of, surgery. When a surgery happens right at the beginning of football season, that's just how it goes. But I'll watch them on TV and still being able to cover them that way. It's just part of the process sometimes. But looking forward to the post-recovery process. It's going to be awesome. But yeah, what you said, I mean, Evans and Judkins are getting about 15 per game each.
Right.
So basically Evans' number slashed in half.
Right.
But nobody's going to complain if they're winning, and that's going to be the great equalizer is, do you win the games? Zach Evans isn't going to have much to say about getting 15 carries instead of 30 if Ole Miss is dominating and winning their games
Right.
and rolling through the schedule.
Right.
You start losing a bunch of games and Quinshon Judkins starts to look bad or something like that, then you might be like, okay, why don't we feed this guy more? Last year, though, it was very similar. You had Snoop Connor, who was dominant, who we saw in the very first game of the year last year, just completely truck a Louisville defender on his way to the end zone. But then you saw Henry Parrish get a lot of carries. And, it was kind of a running back by committee situation a little bit last year as well. Lane Kiffin is so good at getting everybody to work as a team and understand the true vision of what the team is about. And that is just what it's about, is the team. It's not about any individual person. Matt Corral got so many headlines last year, but he never made it about himself. And the maturity level that we saw from him is what Lane wants to see from all of these players. And it's fantastic to see him grow these guys and see Lane grow. And I think that's a big thing that the players have seen, is just how mature Lane is compared to the Lane of 6-7 years ago. That was kind of a laughing stock of, well, where's he going to bounce to next after 5 games? Now it's not like that anymore. Lane Kiffin has really grown. He really loves Oxford. Whatever, it doesn't matter what these goofballs want to say to get clicks and likes on social media. Lane enjoys it here. I'm not sitting here suggesting that he's going to retire in Oxford. Nobody knows that. I'm not saying he might not ever leave. I'm saying he has grown immensely from the let me skip out on Tennessee to go to USC, to go to here, to go to there, whatever the case may be. That's not Lane anymore.
Yeah.
He's really got his life put together. His daughter loves it in Oxford. He likes it there. He likes seeing his kid happy, and that's a big part of his life now. So, and that translates directly to these guys, and we're seeing that, I think. We haven't heard anybody complain out of the running back room yet about, I haven't gotten as many carries as I would like, and that's a good thing. And even look at, J.J. Henry kind of under the radar a little bit, hasn't gotten a lot of carries, only gotten a couple of carries, only a few yards. Little scat back action kind of out of him, though. I would not be surprised to see Ole Miss use him at times just as a little, razzle dazzle. Let me throw him off a little bit. What's he going to do back here, kind of a thing. So I'll be curious to see how much. He's not going to get used a lot. Don't get me wrong. You're not going to see him much, but you might see him a little bit in certain situations, and I think that would be kind of unique. He has a plethora of options in the backfield,
absolutely,
which is something that Ole Miss has not had the luxury of, like Alabama, who has 17 running backs over here on stage. If this guy gets hurt, now Ole Miss has some depth there, and depth has been lacking at Ole Miss for years. Man, I don't remember the last time Ole Miss was deep anywhere.
So the depth is, I think, I don't know if it's surprising, because you knew that Lane Kiffin was going to come in, and you see the players wearing all their gear. It says pro mindset, and that's what he brings, that pro mindset. And you want that depth, and especially at the SEC, because you can't have a Otis Reese or AJ Finley playing 80 snaps a game. Somebody's going to get hurt, and they're not at the top of their game. So if you can, limit them to 60 snaps a game, where you have, I think his name's Trey Washington and a few other guys like that come in and fill some void, for their share of 10, 15 snaps, get them a breather, and I think across the board, the depth is, it's, I'm not going to say it's good, but it's better. It's trending in the right direction. I think in college football, nothing's ever going to be as good as you want it to be, unless you're probably Alabama, which, they're getting all they ask for. But yeah, I think the depth definitely is going to, later in the schedule, when you get into the gauntlet of the SEC West, is definitely going to help a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the depth has been a real issue in the past. I mean, you saw it last year. They threw a graphic up multiple times during the Tennessee game last year of how many snaps the Ole Miss starters had played compared to the opponents, and it was 80 plus, 90 plus a game. And that is not ideal. That is how you get guys hurt. That is how people stop being able to play. That is how injuries happen. And that's exactly what we saw happen to Ole Miss multiple times last season, was guys getting hurt, cramping up over and over again because they're playing 80 and 90 plus snaps a game. And that's just not doable for, most of the time.
No, yeah.
So that aside, the game on Saturday will be at 2:30. It's going to be on ABC, the first time the Ole Miss has played on national television so far this year. They're going to get that early ABC slot before the main game of whatever the day is, wherever College Game Day ends up or typically wherever College Game Day ends up is that game. It wasn't the case last week because of Alabama and Texas being a Fox game. But the big game of the evening, obviously the primetime game will be at 7 o'clock or ish. Ole Miss will be the afternoon game on ABC, and they will be taking on Georgia Tech. No word on who that starter will be for that game yet. Stay tuned to all the Rebel Walks platforms for an update on that when Lane Kiffin announces it. You guys will be the first to know. You might even know before us, depending on where I'm at the time. What kills me is half the time this news breaks at like midnight, okay? And I don't stay up all night every night. So, how about breaking it in the middle of the day when I'm awake sometimes? But, that aside, we'll see who starts. I have no info on that. Pure speculation from Nick and I that we think we might see Luke get the start just because of how little he played.
Right.
But Lane Kiffin could decide, it's going to be Jackson. And who knows? It's all a bunch of political coach talk half the time. We don't really know what's going on. And Lane likes it that way. And I like it that way, quite frankly. I like a coach who keeps it close to the vest. I don't mind that at all.
Yeah.
I really don't mind that at all. I think it's good for his team to understand that he's not going to go out and just blab, whatever needs to be said.
Right.
And whatever he wants to say and what he feels like in the media, which is, again, another area that he's grown in. So, Nick, if you had to make one, what would your prediction be? Caveat, of course, is we don't know who's starting the game.
Right.
But what would your prediction be for the final score of Ole Miss and Georgia Tech this weekend?
I'm going to say 35-17 Ole Miss.
Okay. So you're going a little conservative.
Conservative.
They're going to barely cover
not
the
knowing
spread.
who the quarterback is going to be.
Yeah.
And and I saw, I think in the game notes, you got the 45% of the roster this year are newcomers, whether it's transfer or freshmen, and you got your first row game. So there's a lot of stuff that these guys haven't done together. Going on the road, traveling. It's an hour time difference, but different time zone. So just, all those little details, will it make that big of a difference? I don't think so, but kind of like Lane Kiffin, I'm going to hold it close to the vest and, kind of go a little conservative. The Rebs are going to cover, but
just barely.
Just barely, yeah.
18 points as a 16.5-point favorite. Okay. I'm going to go a little bit more. I'm going to be a little bit more confident. I don't know who's going to start at quarterback just yet, but I'm going to say Ole Miss is going to find a little bit of offense. They're going to take the momentum regardless of the fact that they played the UCA. They're gonna find a little bit of offense a little bit earlier. It's not going to be quite as sloppy as the Troy game was. We know Ole Miss has a history of playing kind of rough in that first game against a mid-level competition. They always kind of played down to that level for whatever reason those first games. I mean, I can think of Southern Illinois off the top of my head is one that Ole Miss almost got beat by. Jacksonville State is one they got beat by.
Right.
All these examples of teams they should have beaten by a mile and definitely shouldn't have lost to, and they play down to. So I don't think it's going to be quite that sloppy. I think Ole Miss puts up 49. I think they're gonna win it 49-21. So I think they're gonna cover. They're gonna take it by 4 scores rather. I think they're gonna find a way to pull away, particularly once the quarterback, whoever it may be, gets settled in. I think the running game is just going to be too much for Georgia Tech.
Absolutely.
Georgia Tech might keep it a little close early, like they did against Clemson, but in the long run, I think the talent wins the game for Ole Miss. I think the coaching of Lane Kiffin is better than what Georgia Tech's got. That's not a shot at Georgia Tech's coach. I think Lane's just got a little bit better of a feel and a better roster to coach. So I think Ole Miss is going to end up winning it by a fairly large margin, and we're going to finally get a taste of what they're capable of. Even though it's Georgia Tech, I think they're going to win this one pretty handily. Again, just a prediction, but I think I think it's going to be a good one for Ole Miss this weekend.
Definitely a dub.
I'm not as nervous about these games I used to be. In the past, I got very nervous about every game. Like, oh my gosh, we could lose this one. We're playing who knows who. Now it's just, Lane Kiffin and the team, the way he coaches the team, they give you more confidence.
Yeah, he's going to have them ready. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, Nick, man, it's been a pleasure. Glad you could jump on. You guys, thanks for watching us. Nick, first time on the show. So y'all don't hold it against him. A little bit nervous tonight, a little bit obviously video-ish, stage fright, whatever you want to call it. Nothing, no big deal there. Hopefully he'll be joining me for a lot more, and the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. So y'all give it up for Nick. Very glad to have him on with me tonight. Evie was unavailable to join us tonight as she had been traveling most of the past week. but hopefully she'll be able to join us some this season as well, and we'll have her on and talk some Ole Miss football as well. But until Saturday, we will say so long. 2:30 Central Time, Ole Miss and Georgia Tech on ABC. Until then, you guys have a great night, and we will talk to you then.